Why do people return to play decade-old games, specifically Borderlands 1, 2, and 3? Through my interviews with the gamers playing Borderlands 1 and 2, and sometimes 3, 3 was rarely brought up in conversation and usually only in a passing neutral light. No one was out there saying that it was the best, and they only really said they've played it once, at most twice. And I wondered why this was the case. While generally positive about the gameplay and the graphics, the criticisms were for the story and the overall refinement of the game's mechanics. These things had changed mainly because the author had been fired for some illegal things. This created a power vacuum where a lot of changes could be made. This is my understanding of what the community manager should be. They talk directly in between the game developer and the community to just as unbiasedly as possible give review and feedback to the developers and information on how the game is going to the community. And there should be a separate position for the moderator to keep said community under attack. In general, the reality of the situation is that the community manager and the moderator have become one combined job, and they filter the feedback of what they find within the community that they're moderating, so the developers don't get as clear of a insight into what their people think of their game. This isn't helped either by games that are made like AAA being more brick houses, where the feedback would only be possible in between titles and games that are made, as compared to the indie, where the game all throughout the process is open to people to see. You don't really get to see what is happening, for example, on the next Skyrim game. You have to just imagine what the next would be, going from the last ones in the franchise. In Borderlands 3's case, it has the community manager and the moderator being one combined entity that is filtering the feedback and not allowing a direct conversation between the reviews and the developer. And I'm not so sure how this works in the case of Borderlands 3, seeing as it is definitely more of a brick house than a in development indie games. Through this, I began to wonder how much Sickart's approach affected the developments of games. Sickart's approach is the difference between a reactive and a reflective player, where he argues that they need to make reactive gamers more reflective games. And this I find to be very in line with the mentalities of ESGs and so on. Specifically, reflective play is more of an enforced, prescripted ideal value that is deemed acceptable, and the end goal usually adheres to the values of the time, whilst reactive games are more viewed through the individual gamer's set of values and allowed more of an individual experience. And whilst reactive games are more meant to have fun, reflective games are more meant to think and reflect upon your actions, not necessarily to be an enjoyed experience. On the left, in red, the reactive game is shown that it can be a high gaminess, a high story, or a low story, low gaminess. It can function anywhere on that grid, whilst the reflective game has to have a high story. It can have some amount of gaminess, but too much gamey will take away from the story, and so it's kind of stuck to the low game, high story area. And what I'm putting on the right is Borderlands 1 and 2 versus 3. In red is Borderlands 1 and 2, and blue is 3. It shows better what I mean by the difference between the games. And I worry about the implications of reflective play, making gamers more emotionally tied to fictional stories, as though it were real, inadvertently train players into being unable to distinguish between fiction and real, and the dangers that that pose.